Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stirred the large pot of stew hanging over the crackling fire. The smell of herbs and vegetables filled the small clearing where he had set up camp for the night. After 3 days of walking through the dense forest, his feet ached and his shoulders burned from carrying his heavy pack. But the warm meal would make everything better. The young man had been traveling for weeks now, moving from village to village, looking for work as a blacksmith. His father had taught him the trade before dying from a fever 2 winters ago. Since then, Marcus had struggled to find a place where he could settle down and build a life for himself. Every town seemed to have enough blacksmiths already, but the people were too poor to pay for his services. As the sun began to set behind the tall pine trees, Marcus added more wood to the fire. The flames danced higher, casting long shadows across the forest floor covered with fallen leaves. He had enough stew to last him 2 days if he was careful. His small pouch of coins was nearly empty, and he needed to make his food stretch until he reached the next village. The forest was quiet except for the gentle crackling of the fire and the distant call of an owl. Marcus felt peaceful for the first time in days. He had always loved being outdoors, even as a child. His mother used to take him on long walks through the woods near their home, teaching him about different plants and animals. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime now. Just as Marcus was about to ladle some stew into his wooden bowl, he heard heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The sound grew louder and louder, as if something enormous was moving toward his camp. Marcus grabbed his walking stick and stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. Bears were common in these woods, and a hungry one could be very dangerous. But what emerged from the darkness was not a bear. It was a man, though the largest man Marcus had ever seen. The stranger stood at least 8 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as a doorframe. His clothes were nothing more than dirty rags that barely covered his massive body. Long, tangled hair hung past his shoulders, and a thick beard covered most of his face. His feet were bare and caked with mud, and Marcus could see cuts and bruises covering his arms and legs. The giant of man stopped at the edge of the firelight and looked down at Marcus with tired, bloodshot eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus gripped his walking stick tighter, though he knew it would be useless against someone so large. The stranger could crush him like a twig if he wanted to. "Please," the giant said in a voice that was surprisingly gentle despite its deep tone. "I smell food. I have not eaten in 4 days." Marcus stared at the man, taking in his gaunt cheeks and the way his ribs showed through the holes in his tattered shirt. Despite his enormous size, the stranger looked like he was starving. His hands shook as he held them out in a pleading gesture. "I have no money," the giant continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I will not take what is not freely given. I only ask for whatever you can spare." Something in the man's voice touched Marcus deeply. He had known hunger himself during the long journey, though never for 4 days straight. He looked at the pot of stew, then back at the giant's desperate face. The smart thing would be to send this stranger away. Marcus had little enough food for himself, and sharing it would mean going hungry tomorrow. But as he looked into the giant's eyes, Marcus saw something that reminded him of his own struggles. This was not a dangerous criminal or a wild man. This was someone who had fallen on hard times, just like Marcus himself. Someone who needed help. "Sit down," Marcus said, gesturing to a fallen log near the fire. "There's plenty for both of us." The giant's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. "You would share your meal with a stranger? Even one who looks as I do?" Marcus nodded and began ladling stew into 2 bowls. "My mother always said that food tastes better when shared with others. Besides, you look like you need it more than I do." The giant lowered himself onto the log, which creaked under his weight. Marcus handed him the larger of the 2 bowls and watched as the man's hands trembled while accepting it. "My name is Marcus," he said, settling down across the fire with his own portion. "I am called Gorin," the giant replied. He held the bowl carefully in his massive hands, as if it were made of the finest crystal. "I cannot remember the last time someone showed me such kindness." As they ate together in comfortable silence, Marcus studied his unusual companion. Despite his ragged appearance, there was something noble about the way Gorin carried himself. His movements were graceful for such a large man, and when he spoke, his words were carefully chosen and polite. This was not some wild hermit living in the forest. This was someone who had once known a better life. "This is the finest stew I have ever tasted," Goran said after finishing his first bowl. "You have the skills of a master cook." Marcus laughed and shook his head. "I am no cook. I'm a blacksmith by trade, though not a very successful one lately. I just throw whatever vegetables I can find into a pot with some water and hope for the best." "A blacksmith?" Goran's eyes lit up with interest. "My people have great respect for those who can shape metal with their hands. It is a skill that requires both strength and wisdom." "Your people?" Marcus asked, curious about this mysterious man's background. Goran's expression grew sad, and he stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I come from mountain tribes far to the north. We are a warrior people, but I am no longer welcome among them." Marcus wanted to ask why, but something in Goran's tone warned him not to press the matter. Instead, he offered his companion another bowl of stew, which Goran accepted gratefully. As the night grew deeper, they talked about many things. Goran spoke of the northern mountains, describing snow-capped peaks that touched the clouds and valleys filled with crystal-clear streams. Marcus shared stories of his travels, the different villages he had visited, and the various people he had met along the way. Despite his fearsome appearance, Goran proved to be intelligent and well-spoken. He knew about plants and animals, about weather patterns, and the best routes through difficult terrain. He had clearly traveled widely and learned much during his journeys. "You mentioned that you seek work as a blacksmith," Goran said as they prepared to settle down for the night. "What manner of work do you prefer?" Marcus poked at the dying fire with a stick, sending sparks floating up into the dark sky. "I can make anything from horseshoes to sword blades. My father taught me well before he died. But most villages already have smiths, or they cannot afford to pay for quality work." "What of weapons?" Goran asked quietly. "Can you forge weapons of war?" "I can," Marcus replied, though he wondered why this gentle giant would ask about such things. "Though I prefer to make tools that help people build rather than destroy." Goran nodded approvingly. "A wise attitude. Too many smiths are eager to forge instruments of death without considering the cost. They spread their blankets on opposite sides of the fire and lay down to sleep." Marcus found himself staring up at the stars through the gaps in the tree branches, thinking about his strange companion. There was clearly much more to Goran's story than the man had revealed, but Marcus sensed that pushing for answers would not be welcome. Just before dawn, Marcus was awakened by a strange sound. At first he thought it might be wind in the trees, but as he listened more carefully, he realized it was the sound of many voices singing in harmony. The melody was haunting and beautiful, unlike anything he had ever heard before. He sat up quietly and looked around the camp. Goran was already awake, sitting on his log and staring off into the forest with an expression of deep sadness on his face. The giant's lips moved silently, as if he were singing along with the distant voices. "What is that sound?" Marcus whispered. Goran turned to him with tears streaming down his cheeks. "It is the death song of my people. Someone of great importance has passed into the next world." The singing continued for several minutes before gradually fading away. Goran wiped his eyes and stood up, his massive frame silhouetted against the gray pre-dawn sky. "I must leave you now, friend Marcus," he said quietly. "But I will not forget your kindness. If you would have shared their food with one such as me." Marcus scrambled to his feet. "Wait, at least let me give you some food for your journey." But Goran was already walking toward the edge of the clearing. "Keep your provisions. You will need them more than I." He paused and looked back over his shoulder. "If ever you find yourself in need, call my name 3 times toward the north wind. I will hear you, and I will remember what you have done." Before Marcus could respond, the giant melted into the shadows between the trees and was gone. Marcus stood alone in his camp, wondering if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a strange dream. But the empty bowl that had held Goran's stew was real enough, and the impression of the giant's weight was still visible in the log where he had sat. Marcus picked up the bowl and washed it in a nearby stream, his mind racing with questions about his mysterious visitor. As the sun rose higher, Marcus packed up his camp and continued his journey south. He walked all day through rolling hills covered with golden grass, but his thoughts kept returning to the gentle giant who had shared his fire. Something about Goran had seemed familiar, though Marcus was certain they had never met before. That evening, as Marcus made camp beside a small river, he heard voices coming from the direction of the road. Soon, a group of traveling merchants appeared, leading pack horses loaded with goods. They looked tired and nervous, constantly glancing over their shoulders as if expecting trouble. "Good evening, friend," called the leader of the group, a middle-aged man with graying hair. "Mind if we share your fire tonight? There is safety in numbers on these roads." Marcus welcomed them to his camp, and soon they had a cheerful blaze going. The merchants shared their wine and dried meat while Marcus contributed vegetables for another pot of stew. As they ate, the merchants told him about conditions in the lands to the south. "Strange times," said one of them, shaking his head. "The mountain tribes are on the move again. Word is that their great chief has died, and now his sons fight among themselves for control." "Aye," agreed another, "and while they battle each other, their warriors raid the lowland villages for supplies. No one is safe anymore." Marcus thought about Gorin and the death song he had heard that morning. Could the giant have been connected to these mountain tribes? The timing seemed too convenient to be mere coincidence. "What do you know of these mountain people?" Marcus asked. "Are they truly as fierce as the stories claim?" The lead merchant laughed bitterly. "Fiercer? I have seen what they can do with my own eyes. Each warrior is worth 10 ordinary men in battle. They know no fear and show no mercy to their enemies. But surely they must have some weaknesses," Marcus said. "Only one," replied the merchant. "They value honor above all else. If you can prove yourself worthy of their respect, they will die to protect you. But earning that respect, that is nearly impossible for an outsider." As the night wore on, the merchants told more stories about the northern tribes. They spoke of massive warriors who could split trees with their bare hands, of battles where a handful of mountain fighters had defeated entire armies, of ancient codes of honor that governed every aspect of their lives. Marcus listened to it all with growing fascination. If Gorin truly was one of these legendary warriors, then what had driven him into exile? And why had he been traveling alone through the forest, starving and dressed in rags? The next morning, the merchants continued south while Marcus turned eastward toward a large town called Millbrook. He had heard that they might need a blacksmith there, as their old one had recently died. It would be good to sleep in a real bed again and earn some honest coin. Millbrook turned out to be larger than Marcus had expected, with stone walls and a market square filled with bustling activity. But as he walked through the streets, he noticed something troubling. Groups of armed men patrolled the walls and gates, and many of the shops had heavy wooden shutters instead of the usual open doors and windows. Marcus found the mayor's house and requested an audience. The official who received him was a nervous, sweating man who kept glancing toward the northern hills as if expecting an attack at any moment. "A blacksmith, you say?" the man asked hopefully. "Can you forge weapons? We have great need of swords and spear points." Marcus nodded, though he felt uneasy about the request. "I can make weapons, though I prefer peaceful work. May I ask why you need so many arms?" The mayor's representative lowered his voice and leaned closer. "The mountain tribes gather in the hills above our valley. Our spies report that thousands of warriors are moving south. We fear they plan to attack before the next full moon." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He thought again of Gorin and wondered if his gentle companion was somehow connected to these gathering armies. The idea seemed impossible, but the timing was too strange to ignore. "I will help however I can," Marcus said finally, "but I will need materials and a proper forge." The official's face brightened with relief. "Of course, we will provide everything you need. There is a smithy near the market square that has been empty since old Henrik died. The tools are still there, and we can supply iron and coal." Marcus spent the rest of the day examining the abandoned smithy and making a list of supplies he would need. The forge was well built and would serve his purposes perfectly. But as he worked, he could not shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen, something that would change his life forever. That night, as he lay in his bed at the local inn, Marcus thought about the simple act of sharing his stew with a hungry stranger. He had no way of knowing that this small gesture of kindness would soon echo through the halls of legend, or that the ragged giant he had fed would prove to be far more than he appeared. The death song Gorin had heard that morning had indeed announced the passing of a great chief. And now, as armies gathered in the northern hills, the future of entire kingdoms hung in the balance. But none of this was clear to Marcus as he drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled with images of towering mountains and the sad, gentle eyes of a giant in rags. Marcus woke before dawn to the sound of urgent voices in the street below his window. He dressed quickly and rushed outside to find the town in chaos. People ran back and forth carrying belongings, while guards shouted orders and pointed toward the northern hills. "What is happening?" Marcus asked a woman who was hurrying past with her children. "The scouts have returned," she said breathlessly. "The mountain army is only 2 days away. They say there are more warriors than anyone has ever seen gathered in one place." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had hoped to have more time to prepare weapons for the town's defense. 2 days would barely be enough to forge a handful of sword blades, let alone arm an entire militia. He made his way to the smithy and began stoking the forge fire. If this was to be his fate, he would meet it by doing what he did best. The familiar rhythm of hammer on anvil would help calm his nerves and focus his mind on the work ahead. As the morning progressed, a steady stream of men brought him iron bars and scrap metal to be worked into weapons. Marcus labored without rest, shaping spear points and sword blades as quickly as his skill would allow. The forge grew blazing hot, and sweat poured down his face and arms as he worked. By midday, word came that advanced scouts from the mountain army had been spotted on the ridgeline overlooking the valley. The town's defenders gathered in the square to receive their hastily made weapons and plan their strategy. Marcus looked at the faces of these ordinary farmers and merchants who now had to prepare for war, and his heart ached for them. The mayor, a stout man named Willem, climbed onto a wooden crate to address the crowd. His voice shook as he spoke, but his words carried determination. "My friends," he began, "we face a terrible test in the coming days. The mountain warriors are fierce beyond measure, and they outnumber us greatly. But this is our home, and we will defend it with our lives if necessary." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some voices spoke of fleeing to the south before it was too late. Others talked of hiding in the forests until the danger passed. Marcus could see the fear in their eyes and knew that many of these people had never held a weapon in their lives. "There is another way," called a voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to see an old woman pushing through the gathered people. Marcus recognized her as Grandmother Elena, the village's eldest resident and keeper of its oldest stories. "Speak, Elena," Mayor Willem said respectfully. "Your wisdom is always welcome." The old woman's eyes were sharp despite her age, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through many hardships. "In the old days, before any of you were born, there was another way to deal with the mountain tribes. Not through battle, but through honor and respect. They are not mindless raiders, despite what you may have heard. They follow ancient codes that value courage and nobility above all else." "What are you suggesting?" the mayor asked. Elena's gaze swept across the crowd before settling on Marcus. "Someone must go to them. Someone who can speak for our town and show that we are people of honor, worthy of their respect." A stunned silence fell over the square. The idea of voluntarily approaching an army of legendary warriors seemed like madness to most of the townspeople. "That would be suicide," protested one of the guards. "They would kill any messenger we sent." "Not if the messenger proved themselves worthy," Elena replied firmly. "The mountain people have their own ways, but they are not without mercy for those who show true courage." Marcus found himself stepping forward before he fully realized what he was doing. "I will go," he said quietly. The crowd erupted in shocked voices. Some people called him crazy, while others begged him to reconsider. But Marcus felt a strange certainty that this was what he needed to do. Perhaps it was connected to his encounter with Gorin, or perhaps it was simply the knowledge that someone had to try. "You cannot," Mayor Willem exclaimed. "You are our only smith. Without you, we have no hope of arming our defenders." Marcus shook his head. "There is not enough time to forge the weapons you would need, even if I worked for a month straight. And Elena is right. If there is any chance of avoiding a massacre, someone must take that chance." Grandmother Elena nodded approvingly and walked over to Marcus. She reached into a worn leather pouch at her belt and pulled out something that gleamed in the sunlight. "Take this," she said, placing a small silver medallion in his hand. "It bears the symbol of the Peacebringer. In the old days, anyone who carried this was granted safe passage to speak with tribal leaders. I do not know if they still honor the old ways, but it may protect you." Marcus looked down at the medallion. It was beautifully crafted, showing a pair of hands clasped in friendship beneath a rising sun. The silver was old and tarnished, but the workmanship was extraordinary. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Elena's eyes grew distant with memory. "My grandmother gave it to me, as her grandmother gave it to her. It has been in our family for generations, waiting for the right time to be used again." Despite the protests of many townspeople, Marcus spent the rest of the day preparing for his journey. He packed light, taking only water, a small amount of food, and the clothes on his back. The silver medallion hung around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. As evening approached, Marcus stood at the northern gate of the town. A small group had gathered to see him off, including Mayor Willem, grandmother Elena, and several of the guards he had been making weapons for. "Are you certain about this?" Willem asked one final time. "It is not too late to change your mind." Marcus looked up at the hills where the mountain army was camped. He could see the glow of their fires like stars scattered across the ridgeline. The sight should have terrified him, but instead he felt an odd sense of calm. "I'm certain," he said. "If I do not return by tomorrow evening, you will know that the talks have failed. Use the time to prepare your defenses as best you can." Elena stepped forward and placed her wrinkled hand on his shoulder. "You have the heart of a true peacebringer, young Marcus. Trust in that and in the ancient bonds between all peoples." As Marcus walked out into the gathering darkness, he heard the town gates close behind him with a hollow thud. The road stretched ahead, winding up into the hills where thousands of warriors waited. Each step took him farther from safety and deeper into uncertainty. The night air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine trees and wildflowers. Marcus had always enjoyed walking alone, but tonight the solitude felt different. Every shadow might hide an enemy scout, and every sound could signal approaching danger. After walking for several hours, Marcus saw the first of the enemy campfires clearly. They dotted the hillsides like fallen stars, and the sound of voices and movement drifted down on the wind. He was now close enough to be spotted by sentries, but so far no one had challenged him. As he rounded a bend in the road, Marcus suddenly found himself face to face with a group of mountain warriors. They seemed to materialize out of the darkness like spirits, moving with a silence that was unnerving for such large men. There were 6 of them, each one tall and powerfully built. They wore armor made of metal plates sewn on a leather, and their weapons gleamed in the moonlight. But what struck Marcus most was their bearing. These were not wild barbarians as he had expected. They moved with discipline and purpose like professional soldiers. The leader of the group stepped forward and spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "You walk alone on a dangerous road, stranger. State your business, or prepare to join the spirits of your ancestors." Marcus swallowed his fear and pulled the silver medallion from beneath his shirt. The metal caught the moonlight and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. "I come as a peacebringer," he said, holding the medallion where they could see it clearly. "I seek an audience with your war chief." The warriors stared at the medallion in obvious surprise. The leader leaned closer to examine it, his eyes widening as he recognized the ancient symbol. "By the sacred mountains," he whispered. "Where did you get this?" "It was given to me by the keeper of our town's oldest stories," Marcus replied honestly. "She said it would grant me safe passage to speak with your leaders." The warrior leader looked at his companions, and Marcus could see them exchanging meaningful glances. Whatever the medallion represented, it clearly held significance for these people. "I am called Stonefist," the leader said finally. "I will escort you to our camp. But know this, peacebringer. The medallion grants you safety to speak, but it does not guarantee that your words will be well received." Marcus nodded his understanding, and the warriors formed a protective circle around him as they climbed higher into the hills. The path was steep and rocky, but his escorts moved with the sure-footed grace of people who had been born in the mountains. As they walked, Stonefist explained some of the customs Marcus would need to observe in the camp. "You must not touch any weapon without permission. You must not look directly at the war chief's face until he give you leave to do so. And you must speak only truth, for lies are detected quickly among my people." The mountain camp was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Thousands of warriors were gathered on a high plateau, their tents and shelters organized in perfect military order. Fires burned in precise rows, and armed sentries patrolled the perimeter with disciplined efficiency. But what struck Marcus most was the silence. Despite the huge number of people, the camp was remarkably quiet. Men spoke in low voices, and even the horses seemed to move with unusual care. This was an army that understood the value of discipline. Stonefist led Marcus through the camp toward a large tent at the center of the plateau. The tent was made of rich, dark fabric and was decorated with symbols that seemed to tell stories of ancient victories. Guards stood at attention on either side of the entrance, their spears gleaming in the firelight. "Wait here," Stonefist commanded. "I will announce your presence to the war chief." Marcus stood nervously outside the tent, very aware of the curious stares from nearby warriors. Some looked at him with suspicion, while others seemed intrigued by the presence of a Lowlander in their camp. But all of them maintained a respectful distance, apparently recognizing his status as a peacebringer. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Stonefist emerged from the tent and gestured for Marcus to enter. "The war chief will see you now. Remember what I have told you about proper behavior." Marcus ducked through the tent flaps and found himself in a spacious interior lit by oil lamps. Rich carpets covered the ground, and weapons of obvious quality hung from the tent poles. But his attention was immediately drawn to the figure seated on a raised platform at the far end of the space. The war chief was enormous, even by the standards of his people. He sat cross-legged on a pile of furs, his massive frame draped in a cloak made from the hide of some great beast. His hair was gray with age, but his eyes burned with the intensity of a much younger man. Scars covered his arms and face, each one telling a story of battles fought and won. But what shocked Marcus most was the resemblance he saw to his gentle companion from a forest. The bone structure of the face, the set of the shoulders, even the way the man held his hands, all reminded him strongly of Gorin. "Approach, Peacebringer," the war chief said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "I am Thorek, the Mountain Shaker, leader of the United Tribes. You carry the ancient medallion, which grants you the right to speak. But first, tell me your name and the name of your people." Marcus stepped forward and bowed respectfully, keeping his eyes lowered as Stonefist had instructed. "I am called Marcus, son of Henrik the Smith. I speak for the people of Millbrook, who wish only to live in peace." "Look upon me, Marcus, son of Henrik," Thorek commanded. Marcus raised his eyes to meet the war chief's gaze. The older man studied his face intently, as if searching for some sign of deception or weakness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You have courage to come here alone," Thorek said finally. "Few Lowlanders would walk willingly into our camp. Tell me, what message do you bring from your people?" Marcus took a deep breath and chose his words carefully. "My people know that they cannot stand against your warriors in battle. We do not seek conflict with the mountain tribes. We only ask that you allow us to live in peace in our valley." Thorek's expression did not change, but Marcus sensed that the war chief was weighing his words carefully. "Peace is a luxury that few can afford in these troubled times. My people need supplies for the coming winter. We need weapons and food and warm clothing. If your town cannot provide these things through trade, then we must take them through conquest." "We would gladly trade with your people," Marcus said quickly. "Our valley produces abundant grain and vegetables. Our craftsmen can make tools and cloth. Surely we can reach an agreement that benefits both our peoples." "Perhaps," Thorek mused, "but trust is not easily built between mountain folk and lowlanders. Too many promises have been broken in the past. Too many agreements have ended in betrayal." Marcus felt his heart sinking. Despite the war chief's willingness to listen, it seemed that years of conflict had created barriers that could not be easily overcome. What would it take to build such trust? Marcus asked desperately. Thorek leaned forward, his eyes boring into Marcus's soul. "A true gesture of good faith. Something that proves your people understand the sacred bonds of honor that govern our lives." "What kind of gesture?" Before Thorek could answer, a commotion erupted outside the tent. Marcus could hear raised voices and the sound of many people moving quickly. The war chief's expression darkened, and he gestured to one of his guards. "Find out what causes this disturbance," he commanded. The guard hurried outside and returned moments later with news that made Marcus's blood run cold. "My lord," the guard reported, "the exiled one has returned. He approaches the camp from the eastern path." Thorek's face went pale, and for the first time since Marcus had entered the tent, the great war chief looked uncertain. Impossible, he whispered. He would not dare. Who is the exiled one? Marcus asked, though something deep in his gut already suggested the answer. Thorek looked at him with eyes full of pain and regret. My youngest son, the one I cast out for showing mercy to our enemies, the one who brought shame upon our family name. Marcus felt the world spinning around him as he realized the truth. The gentle giant who had shared his stew, the ragged wanderer who had spoken of being unwelcome among his own people, that had been Gorin, son of the most powerful war chief in the northern mountains. And now, for reasons Marcus could not understand, Gorin was returning to face the father who had banished him. The son who had been declared dead to his people was walking back into their camp, where his presence could only mean trouble for everyone involved. I must see him, Thorek said, rising to his feet with obvious difficulty. I must know why he has returned. As they prepared to leave the tent, Marcus wondered what role he would play in the drama that was about to unfold. He had come seeking peace between their peoples, but now he found himself caught in the middle of a family tragedy that could determine the fate of thousands. The night air outside the tent was thick with tension as warriors gathered to witness the return of their disgraced prince. And somewhere in that crowd, Marcus knew, walked the gentle giant who had shared his fire and accepted his kindness without question. The question now was whether that small act of compassion would have any power to heal the wounds that divided this family and their people. The entire mountain camp had fallen into an eerie silence as warriors lined the paths leading to the central plateau. Marcus walked beside War Chief Thorek, feeling the weight of thousands of stares upon them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension, as if the very mountains were holding their breath. In the distance, Marcus could see a lone figure approaching through the ranks of warriors. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking the massive frame and distinctive walk of the man he had shared his meal with just days before. But now, seeing Gorin in this context, Marcus began to understand the true magnitude of what was happening. Tell me, Peacebringer, Thorek said quietly as they walked, have you ever seen my son before this night? Marcus hesitated, uncertain how much he should reveal. But the memory of Gorin's gentle voice asking for help and the way his eyes had filled with tears at a simple act of kindness convinced him to tell the truth. Yes, my lord, Marcus replied. 3 days ago, I shared my evening meal with a hungry traveler in the forest. I knew him only as Gorin. He spoke of being unwelcome among his people, but he never told me who his father was. Thorek stopped walking so suddenly that Marcus nearly collided with him. The war chief turned to stare at him with an expression of complete disbelief. You gave food to my son? Thorek asked in a voice barely above a whisper. I did. He had not eaten in 4 days, and he was clearly suffering. It seemed the right thing to do. Thorek's eyes searched Marcus's face as if looking for some sign of deception. And what did he say to you? What words did my exiled son speak to a stranger who showed him kindness? Marcus thought carefully before answering. He was grateful beyond measure. He said he could not remember the last time someone had shown him such kindness. And when he left the next morning, he told me to call his name 3 times toward the north wind if I ever found myself in need. A strange expression crossed the war chief's features, part wonder, part pain, and something else that Marcus could not identify. Before Thorek could respond, they reached the edge of the crowd where Gorin would soon appear. The warriors parted like water before a ship as the exiled prince approached. Marcus was struck again by Gorin's imposing size, but now he also noticed details he had missed in the dim firelight of their camp. Despite his ragged clothes, Gorin moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. His posture spoke of nobility and breeding, even in exile and disgrace. But it was Gorin's face that captured Marcus's attention most. The gentle giant, who had wept with gratitude at a shared meal now, wore an expression of grim determination. His jaw was set, his eyes focused straight ahead, and his hands hung loose at his sides in the manner of someone prepared for violence. The crowd formed a large circle around the central area, with Thorek and Marcus at one edge and Gorin approaching from the opposite side. The silence was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Gorin stopped in the center of the circle, perhaps 20 paces from where his father stood. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Father and son regarded each other across a gulf that seemed far wider than the physical distance between them. So, Thorek said finally, his voice carrying clearly across the plateau. The dead have returned to walk among the living. I was never dead, father, Gorin replied, his deep voice steady and calm. Only cast out. Only forgotten. You were cast out for good reason, Thorex said, and Marcus could hear old anger rising in his tone. You showed mercy to enemies who deserved none. You chose the path of weakness over the way of strength. Gorin's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained controlled. I chose the path of honor over the way of slaughter. There is a difference, though you refuse to see it. A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. Marcus could see that many of them were uncomfortable with this confrontation between their leader and his son. This was clearly a family wound that had never properly healed. Honor. Thorex spat. You call it honor to spare the lives of raiders who had burned our villages? You call it honor to let murderers escape to kill again. I call it honor to show mercy to defeated enemies who posed no further threat. Gorin shot back. I call it honor to be better than those who wrong us, rather than becoming the same as them. Thorex took a step forward, his massive frame seeming to grow even larger with anger. Your mercy allowed those raiders to regroup and attack the settlement of Bear Creek. 30 of our people died because of your weakness. 30 souls cry out for justice that will never come because my son chose to be soft-hearted. For the first time, Marcus saw Gorin's composure crack. Pain flickered across the giant's features, and his shoulders sagged slightly under the weight of his father's accusation. I did not know, Gorin said quietly. No one told me that they had regrouped. If I had known, if you had known, would you have acted differently? Thorex demanded. Would you have had the strength to do what was necessary, or would you have found another excuse for weakness? The question hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. Marcus found himself holding his breath, waiting for Gorin's answer. I do not know, Gorin admitted finally, but I cannot change what I am, father. I cannot become the killer you want me to be. Then, why have you returned? Thorex asked. What purpose brings you back to the people who cast you out? Gorin straightened his shoulders and looked directly into his father's eyes. I have come to challenge the decision to make war on the lowland villages. I have come to speak for peace. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and explosive. Warriors shouted in anger and disbelief, some calling for Gorin to be seized, and others demanding to know why he cared about the fate of lowlanders. But Thorex raised his hand for silence, and gradually the noise died away. You dare to question my judgment? The war chief asked dangerously. You, who have been declared dead to us. You, who chose exile over accepting the consequences of your actions. I question judgment that will lead to unnecessary bloodshed, Gorin replied firmly. I question war against people who have done us no harm. No harm. Thorex's voice rose to a roar. They have everything our people need, and they refuse to share it. Their granaries overflow while our children go hungry. Their craftsmen make fine weapons while our warriors carry rusted blades. Have you asked them to trade? Gorin challenged. Have you offered to exchange our goods for theirs? Or do you simply assume they will refuse because that justifies taking what we need by force? Marcus felt his heart pounding as he realized that this was his moment. The argument between father and son had opened a door that might never come again. He stepped forward before his courage could fail him. My lords, he said, his voice carrying across the silent circle. If I may speak. Both Thorex and Gorin turned to look at him, and Marcus felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. But he also felt the silver medallion warm against his chest, reminding him of his purpose here. I am the peacebringer from Millbrook, he continued. I came here tonight to speak for my people, to offer trade and friendship between our communities. What your son says is true. We have never been asked to share our abundance. We have only heard rumors of raids and war. Thorex's eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus. And what would your people offer in trade for peace, Lowlander? Marcus took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. Everything we have, my lord. Our grain and vegetables for your furs and metals. Our crafts and knowledge for your protection and friendship. We ask only to live in peace and prosperity together. Pretty words, Thorex said dismissively. But words are cheap, and trust must be earned. What guarantee do we have that your people will honor any agreement we make? It was Gorin who answered, stepping forward to stand beside Marcus. You have the guarantee of shared kindness, father. This man fed me when I was starving. He showed compassion to a stranger without asking for anything in return. If his people are like him, then they can be trusted. Thorek stared at his son in amazement. You would stake your life on the character of someone you barely know? I would stake my life on the character of someone who showed mercy when they had no reason to do so, Goran replied. Just as I would hope others might judge me by my actions rather than my bloodline. The war chief turned his attention back to Marcus, and for a long moment they regarded each other in silence. Marcus could see the conflict in Thorek's eyes, the desire for his son's approval warring against years of hardened prejudice, and the practical needs of his people. You speak of trade and friendship, Thorek said slowly. But how can we know that your offer is genuine? How can we trust people we have never dealt with before? Marcus felt inspiration strike him like lightning. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out the small eating knife he always carried. Before anyone could stop him, he drew the blade across his palm, opening a shallow cut that began to bleed immediately. By the old ways, Marcus said, holding out his bleeding hand, let us seal our agreement with the bond of blood brothers. I offer my life as guarantee of my people's honor. A gasp ran through the crowd of warriors. Even in his limited knowledge of mountain customs, Marcus knew that the blood brother bond was sacred among these people. It was not offered lightly, and it could not be broken without dire consequences. Thorek stared at the offered hand in shock. You would bind yourself to us in blood? You, a lowlander who knows nothing of our ways. I know enough to understand that honor matters more than words, Marcus replied. If you will have me, I offer myself as a surety for the peace between our peoples. Goran stepped closer, his eyes shining with something that might have been pride. Father, I have traveled in many lands and met many people. Never have I seen such courage from someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Thorek looked from Marcus to his son and back again. The tension in the circle was so thick that Marcus could almost taste it. Finally, the war chief spoke. There is wisdom in what you both say, he admitted reluctantly. Perhaps there is another way than war. He drew his own knife and made a matching cut across his palm. Then, to the amazement of everyone present, he reached out and clasped Marcus's bleeding hand in his own. By the sacred bond of blood and honor, Thorek announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the plateau, I name this man Marcus, son of Henrik, a brother to our people. His word is our word, his honor is our honor, and his life is bound to ours until death claims us all. The ritual completed, Marcus felt a strange warmth spread up his arm from where their blood had mingled. Whether it was physical or spiritual, he could not say, but something fundamental had changed in that moment. But the drama was far from over. As Thorek released Marcus's hand, the war chief turned to face his son with an expression that was impossible to read. And what are you, my son? Thorek asked quietly. Will you also stand surety for this peace? Will you bind yourself once again to the welfare of our people? Goran did not hesitate. He drew his own blade and cut his palm without flinching. I will, father, but not as your son seeking forgiveness. I stand here as a warrior who believes in something better than endless conflict. Father and son clasped their bleeding hands together, and Marcus saw tears streaming down both their faces. Years of pain and separation seemed to dissolve in that moment, replaced by something that might, in time, become understanding. Then, it is decided, Thorek announced to the crowd. We will try the path of peace before we walk the road of war. Tomorrow, we will send representatives to meet with the leaders of Millbrook. If an agreement can be reached that serves both our peoples, then perhaps the bloodshed can be avoided. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and confused murmurs. Some warriors clearly approved of this unexpected turn toward diplomacy, while others seemed uncertain about abandoning their plans for conquest. But all of them recognized that their war chief had spoken, and his word was law. As the gathering dispersed, Marcus found himself standing with Goran under the star-filled sky. The giant's hand was wrapped in a strip of cloth to stop the bleeding, and his face wore an expression of cautious hope. You took a great risk tonight, Goran said quietly. The blood-brother bond cannot be undone, even if the peace talks fail. Marcus nodded, still somewhat stunned by the magnitude of what had just happened. I know, but sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. My father is not an evil man, Goran continued. He is simply someone who has known too much loss and hardship. He builds walls to protect his people, but sometimes those walls become prisons. And what about you? Marcus asked. Will you stay with your people now? Goran looked up at the mountains that surrounded them, his expression thoughtful. That remains to be seen. Much depends on whether this peace can truly take root, or whether old hatreds prove too strong to overcome. As they stood there in comfortable silence, Marcus reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A simple act of kindness to a hungry stranger had somehow led to this opportunity for lasting peace between their peoples. But even as hope flickered in his heart, Marcus knew that the hardest part lay ahead. Convincing the war chief to consider peace was only the first step. Now came the delicate work of building trust between communities that had regarded each other as enemies for generations. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Representatives from both peoples would have to find ways to bridge the gaps of fear and misunderstanding that separated them. And Marcus, bound now by blood and honor to both sides, would stand at the center of it all. As he settled down to sleep in a tent provided by Thorek's hospitality, Marcus wondered if his simple blacksmith skills would be enough to help forge something far more valuable than any weapon. A lasting bond of peace between the mountain warriors and the people of the valleys below. Dawn broke over the mountain camp with unusual quietness. Marcus woke to find the plateau shrouded in a thick mist that muffled sounds and made the massive gathering of warriors seem almost dreamlike. As he emerged from his tent, he could see that many of the mountain people were already up and moving about, but their activities seemed subdued, as if they too were uncertain about what the new day would bring. Goran appeared out of the mist like a gentle giant from a fairy tale. His palm was properly bandaged now, and he wore clean clothes that had been provided by his father's servants. Seeing him dressed as befitted his royal status, Marcus was struck again by the nobility that shone through despite his humble demeanor. "My father wishes to speak with you before we descend to your village," Goran said. "There are matters of protocol that must be discussed." Marcus followed his friend through the camp to Thorek's tent, noting how the other warriors watched them pass. Some faces showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few displayed what might have been hope. The news of the Blood Brothers ceremony had spread quickly through the ranks, and everyone seemed to be waiting to see what would come of this unprecedented development. Inside the war chief's tent, Marcus found Thorek seated with several of his senior advisors. These were hard-faced men with scars and weathered hands, the kind of warriors who had spent their lives fighting. They looked at Marcus with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. "Sit, blood brother," Thorek said, gesturing to a place of honor beside him. "We have much to discuss before we venture down to your people." Marcus took his seat, very aware of the weight of attention from the assembled leaders. These men represented thousands of warriors, and their acceptance or rejection of any peace agreement would determine whether the negotiation succeeded or failed. "First," Thorek began, "you must understand that my people have specific needs that cannot be ignored. Our harvests this year were poor due to late storms. Our children face hunger in the coming winter if we do not acquire additional food supplies. Our valley produces more grain than we can use ourselves," Marcus replied. "We have always sold our surplus to traveling merchants, but we would gladly trade directly with your people instead." One of the advisors, a grizzled veteran with a missing eye, leaned forward aggressively. "And what assurance do we have that you will not simply raise your prices once you know we need your grain? Merchants have cheated us before." Marcus met the man's hostile gaze steadily. "Because we would not be merchants selling to strangers. We would be neighbors helping neighbors. The blood brother bond extends beyond just War Chief Thorek and myself. It creates kinship between our peoples." "Pretty words," another advisor muttered. "But kinship does not fill empty bellies." "No," Marcus agreed, "but honest trade does. And honest trade requires trust on both sides. You need our grain, but we need your protection. The roads are dangerous for traveling merchants, but raiders would think twice about attacking caravans under the protection of mountain warriors." Thorek nodded thoughtfully. "There is wisdom in this, but there are other concerns as well. My people need weapons and tools. Our own smiths are skilled, but they lack the fine iron that lowland forges produce." Marcus's eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "My lord, I have seen your warriors' weapons. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. If your smiths could teach me their techniques, while I share my knowledge of working lowland iron, We could create blades that surpass anything either of our peoples has made before. This suggestion caused a stir among the advisors. The sharing of smithing secrets was not something to be considered lightly, as weapons technology could determine the outcome of wars. You would teach our enemies how to make better weapons? The one-eyed advisor demanded. I would teach my blood brothers how to defend themselves more effectively, Marcus corrected firmly. Just as I hoped they would teach me their superior techniques for working in leather and fur. Goran, who had been silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. Father, what he proposes is exactly what our people need. Not conquest and raiding, but genuine partnership. Each side contributing what they do best for the benefit of all. Thorek studied his son's face for a long moment. And you believe this is possible? You think these lowlanders can truly be trusted with our welfare? I know at least one of them can be, Goran replied, glancing at Marcus. And if one can be trusted, perhaps others can as well. The war chief turned back to Marcus. Very well. We will accompany you to your village and hear what your leaders have to say. But know this, blood brother. If your people prove treacherous or false, the consequences will be severe. The bond between us will become a chain of vengeance rather than friendship. Marcus swallowed hard but nodded his understanding. I accept that responsibility, my lord. I believe in my people, just as you believe in yours. Within an hour, a delegation was assembled for the journey to Millbrook. Thorek would lead the group, accompanied by Goran and 6 of his most trusted advisors. Marcus would guide them and serve as translator between the two cultures, though he was beginning to realize how little he truly understood about either side. As they prepared to leave the camp, Marcus was surprised to see hundreds of warriors lining the paths to bid them farewell. Some called out blessings for success in the negotiations, while others shouted warnings to be careful of Lowlander treachery. But all of them seemed to understand that their leaders were embarking on something that could change the future of both peoples. The descent from the mountains took most of the morning. Marcus was amazed by the sure-footedness of his companions, who moved down the steep, rocky paths as easily as if they were walking on level ground. Their horses, too, were remarkable creatures, smaller than lowland breeds, but incredibly strong and agile. As they traveled, Goran rode beside Marcus and spoke quietly of his hopes for the coming negotiations. My father has always been a proud man, Goran said, but pride should not stand in the way of what is best for our people. If your villagers can show respect for our customs while demonstrating their sincerity, I think an agreement can be reached. What custom should I warn them about? Marcus asked, realizing that there might be protocols he was unaware of. Nothing too complex, Goran assured him. Offer food and drink immediately upon arrival. This shows hospitality. Do not refuse anything offered by my father, even if you do not want it. And when discussing serious matters, speak directly without flowery language. Mountain people value honesty above eloquence. As they neared the valley floor, Marcus could see smoke rising from the chimneys of Millbrook in the distance. The sight of his temporary home filled him with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because he had survived his dangerous mission, but anxiety because the hardest part was yet to come. There, he said, pointing toward the town. That is Millbrook, where my people wait to learn whether there will be peace or war. Thorek rode up beside them and studied the settlement with the eye of an experienced military commander. Marcus could see him noting the wall height, the number of gates, and the defensive positions that had been prepared for the expected attack. It is smaller than I expected, the war chief observed, but well-positioned. Your people chose their location wisely. They are farmers and craftsmen, not warriors, Marcus explained. They built their defenses out of necessity, not desire for conflict. As their small party approached the gates of Millbrook, Marcus could see guards on the walls staring at them in amazement. Word was quickly passed down into the town, and by the time they reached the main entrance, a crowd had gathered in the square beyond. Mayor Willem stood at the head of a delegation of town leaders, his face pale but determined. Marcus could see the fear in the man's eyes as he looked upon the massive mountain warriors, but he also saw courage. These people were prepared to face whatever came, even if it meant their destruction. People of Millbrook, Marcus called out as they stopped before the gates. I have returned as I promised, and I bring with me War Chief Thorek of the Mountain Tribes and his son, Prince Goran. They come in peace to discuss terms for cooperation between our peoples. The crowd murmured uncertainly, clearly struggling to understand how Marcus had managed to transform a conquering army into a diplomatic mission. Mayor Willem stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly as he spoke. We welcome you to our town, mighty Thorek. Please, enter as our honored guests." Thorek dismounted and approached the mayor with a fluid grace that seemed natural to all his people. For a moment, the two leaders stood facing each other, one a weathered warrior from the harsh mountains, the other a soft-spoken administrator from the fertile valleys. "I accept your hospitality, Willem of Millbrook," Thorek said formally. "Let us speak of matters that concern both our peoples." As the mountain delegation entered the town, Marcus noticed how the townspeople pressed back against the buildings, creating a clear path while staring at their visitors with mixture of fear and fascination. He could hardly blame them. The mountain warriors were an imposing sight, even when they came in peace. Grandmother Elena pushed through the crowd and approached Marcus with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually convinced them to talk instead of fight." "The talking has only just begun," Marcus replied quietly. "The real challenge is making sure both sides can find common ground." The town hall had been hastily prepared for the meeting, with chairs arranged around a large table and refreshments laid out according to the customs Goran had described. As the two delegations took their seats, Marcus found himself in the unique position of belonging to both sides, yet fully trusted by neither. Mayor Willem opened the proceedings with a formal welcome, but Marcus could see that the man was struggling to know how to address such an unusual situation. Thorek, for his part, seemed content to listen and observe while the Lowlanders revealed their character through their words and actions. "We understand that your people have needs," Willem began carefully. "Marcus has told us that food is a concern for the coming winter. We have surplus grain and vegetables that we would be happy to share." "Share?" One of Thorek's advisors interjected suspiciously. "At what price? What do you expect in return?" Willem looked to his own advisors before responding. "We would hope for protection for our trading caravans and assistance in defending against raiders. In return, we offer not only food but access to our craftsmen and their skills. And if we discover that you are lying about your surpluses," another mountain advisor demanded. "If we find that you are offering us scraps while keeping the best for yourselves?" The tension in the room was rising quickly, and Marcus could see that old prejudices and suspicions were threatening to derail the negotiations before they truly began. He stood up, hoping to calm the situation before it escalated beyond repair. "My friends from both peoples," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "We are here because we all want the same thing, security and prosperity for our families. Instead of arguing about what might go wrong, let's discuss how we can make things go right." Goran nodded approvingly and rose to stand beside Marcus. "My blood brother speaks wisdom. Perhaps we should begin with specific proposals rather than general fears." For the next several hours, the two sides worked through the details of what a trading partnership might look like. The mountain people would provide furs, precious metals, and protection services. The valley dwellers would supply grain, vegetables, crafted goods, and access to lowland trade networks. Slowly, tentatively, the outline of an agreement began to take shape. It was not perfect, and both sides had to make compromises that some found difficult to accept. But as the day wore on, Marcus began to see something remarkable happening. Former enemies were starting to see each other as potential partners. The breakthrough came when Thorek's master craftsman, a weathered old warrior named Stonecarver, began discussing metalworking techniques with Marcus. The two men discovered a shared passion for their craft that transcended cultural boundaries. "Your lowland iron is indeed superior to what we can mine in our mountains," Stonecarver admitted. "But our techniques for tempering and folding the metal could improve the strength of your blades significantly." Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement. "Would you be willing to teach these techniques? I would gladly share everything I know about working with different types of iron." "A mutual exchange of knowledge," Thorek mused. "This could benefit both our peoples greatly." As evening approached, the broad framework of an agreement had been established. There would be regular trading expeditions between the mountains and the valley. Young people from both cultures would be exchanged as apprentices and students. And, most importantly, the two peoples would come to each other's aid in times of crisis. But even as Marcus felt hope growing in his heart, he knew that the real test would come when they tried to implement these agreements. Years of mistrust could not be overcome in a single day, and there would inevitably be challenges and setbacks along the way. As the meeting concluded, Thorex stood and addressed both delegations. "We have made a good beginning here today, but words are wind unless they are backed by action. Let us prove, through our deeds, that this peace can endure." The mountain warriors would remain in Millbrook for 3 more days, working out the practical details of their new partnership. During this time, Marcus would serve as liaison between the two groups, helping to smooth over misunderstandings and build personal relationships between former enemies. But as he looked around the room at the faces of people from both cultures, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The gentle giant who had shared his stew had become the bridge that made peace possible. And the simple act of feeding a hungry stranger had somehow grown into something that could change the fate of thousands. The work of building lasting peace would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, both peoples had real hope for a better future. And at the center of it all stood the unlikely friendship between a humble blacksmith and an exiled prince, 2 men who had discovered that courage and compassion could overcome even the deepest divisions. 6 months had passed since the peace agreements were signed in Millbrook's town hall. The autumn air was crisp and clean as Marcus hammered out a horseshoe on his anvil, the familiar rhythm helping him think through the complex trade negotiations he would be attending later that day. His small forge had grown into a bustling workshop that served both mountain and valley communities, with apprentices from both cultures learning side by side. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention away from his work. Through the open doorway of his forge, Marcus could see a familiar massive figure riding toward him. Goran had returned from his latest diplomatic mission to the eastern tribes, and, judging by his expression, he bore important news. "My friend," Goran called out as he dismounted, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and concern. "We must speak privately. Events are unfolding that could threaten everything we have built together." Marcus set down his hammer and gestured toward his private quarters behind the forge. "Tell me what has happened. You look as if you have ridden hard for many days." Indeed, Goran's clothes were dusty from travel, and his usually pristine appearance showed signs of haste. As they settled into comfortable chairs around Marcus's small table, the prince's expression grew grave. "The Eastern Mountain tribes have received word of our peace with the Valley peoples," Goran began. "Some of their leaders see this as weakness rather than wisdom. They gather their own armies, preparing to test whether our new alliance can withstand a real challenge." Marcus felt his heart sink. He had feared that something like this might happen. While their own peace had held remarkably well, they had always known that other tribal groups might view their success as an opportunity to expand their own territories. "How large is this threat?" Marcus asked. "Larger than anything we faced before," Goran admitted. 3 separate tribal confederations have joined together under a war chief called Bloodaxe Magnus. He commands perhaps 15,000 warriors, many more than my father can field even with your people's support." Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking out at the peaceful valley where both mountain and lowland families now worked together in the fields. Children from both cultures played together in the streets, and the market squares buzzed with friendly commerce. The thought of all this being destroyed by war made him feel sick. "There is more," Goran continued quietly. "Magnus has sent messengers to my father demanding that he renounce the peace treaties and join their coalition against the lowlanders. If he refuses, they will consider our mountain clans to be enemies as well. And what does your father intend to do?" Goran's face showed pride mixed with worry. "He has told their messengers that the mountain people honor their agreements. We will stand with our valley brothers regardless of the cost." Marcus turned back to face his friend, feeling a mixture of gratitude and dread. Thorex's loyalty was admirable, but it might doom them all. 15,000 warriors, he repeated slowly. "Even combined, our forces number less than half that. Which is why I have come to you," Goran said, rising from his chair. "You're not only our blood brother and ally, but you have also proven to be a master of bringing people together. We need you to work a miracle once more." "What kind of miracle?" Goran moved to the window and pointed toward the southern hills. "There are other valley communities beyond Millbrook, towns and villages that have heard of our success but have not yet joined our alliance. If they could be convinced to stand with us, we might have enough combined strength to face this threat." Marcus considered this possibility. He had indeed heard rumors of other communities that were interested in forming partnerships with the mountain tribes. But Convincing them to commit warriors to a major battle would be far more difficult than arranging trade agreements. How much time do we have? Marcus asked. Perhaps 2 months before Magnus' coalition reaches our borders. They're currently gathering supplies and allies from tribes even farther east. Marcus made his decision quickly. Then, we had better get started immediately. I will need guides who know the locations of these other communities, and I will need your father's official blessing as a negotiator. You have both, Goran assured him. But, Marcus, you should know that this mission will be far more dangerous than our previous peace negotiations. Some of these valley communities have good reason to distrust mountain people, and they may not welcome our messengers warmly. Over the next 3 days, Marcus prepared for what would be the most challenging diplomatic mission of his life. He would travel with a small escort of both mountain warriors and valley militiamen, visiting 6 different communities in an attempt to forge a defensive alliance. The first village they visited was a farming settlement called Green River, located 2 days' ride south of Millbrook. The people there were indeed suspicious of mountain warriors, having suffered raids in the past from tribes that were not part of Thorek's confederation. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to convince people to trust the very type of warriors who had previously attacked them. It took hours of patient explanation and demonstration of the genuine friendship between his mountain and valley escorts before the village elders even agreed to listen to his proposal. You ask us to risk our lives for people we do not know, said the village chief, an elderly woman named Sarah whose face bore scars from an old raid. What assurance do we have that this is not some elaborate trick to make us vulnerable? Marcus thought carefully before responding. He pulled out a small object that he had carried with him since the night he first met Goran, a roughly carved wooden bowl that the giant had used to eat his stew. This belonged to a hungry stranger I fed by my campfire, Marcus said, setting the bowl on the table between them. I had no idea who he was or whether he might be dangerous. I simply saw someone who needed help. He went on to tell the complete story of how that simple act of kindness had led to the peace between their peoples. When he finished, the village elders sat in thoughtful silence. You would have us believe that sharing a meal can change the fate of nations? Sarah asked skeptically. I would have you believe that small acts of courage and compassion can grow into something far greater than we ever imagined, Marcus replied. But the choice is yours to make. The negotiations continued through the evening and into the following day. Gradually, through patience and honesty, Marcus managed to convince the people of Green River that their best hope for survival lay in joining with others rather than trying to stand alone. The pattern repeated itself in each community they visited. Fear and suspicion had to be overcome through demonstration and example. Old grievances had to be acknowledged and addressed. And always, Marcus found himself drawing on the lessons he had learned from his friendship with Goran, that people of different backgrounds could find common ground if they were willing to look beyond their preconceptions. Some villages agreed to join the alliance immediately. Others required weeks of discussion and debate before reaching a decision. One community, a mining town called Iron Falls, refused entirely, declaring that they would rather take their chances hiding in their deep underground tunnels than trusting mountain warriors. But by the time Magnus' armies appeared on the northern horizon, Marcus had succeeded in creating a defensive coalition that included 8 valley communities and 4 mountain clans. The combined force still numbered fewer than the enemy, but they had other advantages that Marcus hoped would prove decisive. The final battle took place in a broad valley between 2 ridgelines, a location chosen specifically to maximize the effectiveness of their coordinated tactics. Marcus positioned himself on a hill overlooking the battlefield, not as a combatant, but as a coordinator who could relay messages between the different groups. What happened that day would be remembered in songs and stories for generations to come. The mountain warriors, fighting alongside valley militia, proved that their new alliance was more than just words on paper. They had become a true brotherhood, each group covering the weaknesses of others while maximizing their collective strengths. But the moment that would be talked about most was when Magnus himself, mounted on a massive war horse and wielding a battle axe that glinted in the afternoon sun, challenged Thorek to single combat. According to mountain tradition, such a challenge could not be refused without dishonor. As the 2 war chiefs prepared to face each other in the center of the battlefield, Marcus saw Goran step forward. The prince had every right to fight in his father's place, and Everyone expected him to do so, except for Thorek himself. "No, my son," the Old War chief said firmly. "This is my responsibility, and mine alone." The duel that followed was as much a battle between two philosophies as between two warriors. Magnus fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who believed that might made right. Thorek fought with the controlled power of someone who had learned to temper strength with wisdom. For nearly an hour, the two giants exchanged devastating blows while both armies watched in tense silence. Both men were wounded multiple times, but neither would yield. Finally, as the sun began to set behind the western mountains, Thorek landed a decisive blow that sent Magnus crashing to the ground. But instead of delivering the killing stroke that everyone expected, Thorek stepped back and offered his hand to help his fallen enemy rise. "You fought with honor, Magnus," Thorek said loudly enough for both armies to hear. "Your strength is remarkable, but your cause is wrong. Join us in building something better than endless war." Magnus stared up at the offered hand in amazement. According to every tradition he knew, he should have been executed as a defeated enemy. The fact that Thorek was showing him mercy, just as Goran had shown mercy to defeated enemies years before, seemed to shake the very foundations of his beliefs. For a long moment, the entire battlefield held its breath. Then, slowly, Magnus reached up and grasped Thorek's hand, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. I do not understand," Magnus said, confusion clear in his voice. "Why do you spare me?" "Because my son taught me that mercy is not weakness," Thorek replied. "Because a simple blacksmith taught me that sharing what we have makes us all stronger. And because the old ways of endless fighting have brought nothing but suffering to our people. What happened next will be talked about for centuries." Instead of continuing the battle, Magnus called out to his warriors and ordered them to lay down their arms. One by one, then in groups, then in massive waves, the Eastern warriors began dropping their weapons and raising their hands in surrender. But they were not treated as conquered enemies. Following Thorek's example, the Alliance forces moved among them, offering water to the wounded and food to the hungry. The same spirit of compassion that had begun with a shared bowl of stew now extended to encompass thousands of former enemies. As the immediate crisis passed and negotiations began for integrating the Eastern tribes into the growing alliance, Marcus found himself standing with Goran on the same hill where they had coordinated the battle. "It is remarkable," Goran observed, watching mountain and valley people working together to tend the wounded. "A year ago, none of this would have seemed possible." Marcus nodded, still somewhat stunned by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. "Your father was magnificent today. The way he showed mercy to Magnus. That took more courage than any warrior's charge." "He learned that from you," Goran said quietly, "just as I learned it from you. The night you shared your stew with a hungry stranger, you planted a seed that has grown beyond anything you could have imagined." In the weeks that followed, the integration of the Eastern tribes proved remarkably smooth. Magnus, transformed by his experience of receiving unexpected mercy, became one of the strongest advocates for the new way of cooperation rather than conquest. His warriors, seeing their leader's change of heart, gradually embraced the alliance as well. The settlement that grew up at the site of the Great Battle became known as Peace Valley, and it quickly developed into a major trading center where all the allied communities could come together. Marcus established a large forge there, training apprentices from every tribe and village in the advanced metalworking techniques they had developed. But perhaps the most significant change was in the way people thought about conflict itself. The old pattern of raid and counter-raid, of revenge breeding more revenge, was gradually replaced by a new approach that emphasized dialogue and compromise. When disputes arose between communities, they were brought to Peace Valley for mediation rather than being settled through violence. 5 years after the Great Battle, Marcus stood before a gathering of representatives from more than 30 communities that had joined the alliance. They had come together to celebrate the anniversary of their victory and to plan for the future. As he looked out at the crowd, Marcus marveled at the diversity of faces before him. Mountain warriors sat next to valley farmers. Former enemies shared meals and swapped stories of their children. The rigid tribal boundaries that had once seemed so important had blurred into something far more flexible and inclusive. "My friends," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. 5 years ago, we faced what seemed like an impossible choice. We could continue the old ways of suspicion and conflict, or we could risk everything on the possibility that people of different backgrounds could learn to trust each other. He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the gathering. Today, we see the fruits of that choice. Our children grow up speaking multiple languages and learning skills from every culture in our alliance. Our traders travel safely between communities that once viewed each other as mortal enemies. Our warriors stand ready to defend not just their own people, but all who have joined our brotherhood. A cheer arose from the crowd, but Marcus raised his hand for continued attention. But perhaps the most important thing we have learned is this: the things that divide us are far smaller than the things that unite us. We all want safety for our families. We all want prosperity for our communities. We all want a future where our children can live in peace. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the gathering moved into celebration, Marcus found himself approached by a young man he did not recognize. The stranger was tall and powerfully built, clearly of mountain heritage, but his clothes and bearing suggested that he had traveled from far away. "Master Marcus," the young man said respectfully, "I bring greetings from the far northern tribes beyond the Ice Pass. We have heard stories of the alliance you have helped create, and our elders wish to know if there might be room in your brotherhood for people who live in the frozen lands." Marcus smiled and gestured toward the celebrating crowd. "There is always room for those who come in peace and friendship. Tell me about your people and their needs." As the young ambassador began describing his homeland and the challenges faced by tribes living in the harsh Arctic regions, Marcus felt a familiar excitement building in his chest. The alliance had grown far beyond anything he had originally envisioned, but there were still more communities that could benefit from joining their network of mutual support and cooperation. Later that evening, as the celebrations wound down and most of the representatives prepared for sleep, Marcus sat by a campfire with Goran and Thorek. The war chief had aged visibly over the past 5 years, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him such an effective leader. "I've been thinking," Thorek said quietly, staring into the flames, "about the story you told us of the night you fed my son. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if you had chosen differently that night." "I try not to think about such things," Marcus replied. "The past is fixed, and dwelling on alternative possibilities serves no purpose." "Perhaps," Thorek mused, "but I think it is important to remember that small choices can have enormous consequences. The decision to share your food with a stranger seemed trivial at the time, but it changed the fate of thousands of people." Goran nodded thoughtfully. "It reminds us that we never know when our actions might have effects far beyond what we intended. Every act of kindness, every gesture of trust, every moment when we choose cooperation over conflict, all of these ripple outward in ways we cannot predict." Marcus looked around at the peaceful camp where former enemies now slept side by side, protected by guards who came from a dozen different communities but served the common cause. Then, perhaps the lesson is simply to choose kindness whenever possible, and trust that good things will come from good intentions. A simple philosophy, Thorek observed, but apparently an effective one. As the three friends settled down for the night, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a chance encounter in a forest clearing had grown into something that affected entire regions. The alliance continued to expand as more communities heard about their success and chose to join their network of mutual support. But even as he felt pride in what they had accomplished, Marcus knew that the work was far from finished. Building peace was not a task that could be completed once and then forgotten. It required constant attention, continuous effort, and the willingness to keep choosing cooperation over conflict day after day, year after year. The next morning brought news that perfectly illustrated this ongoing challenge. A messenger arrived from the southeastern coast, reporting that a group of sea raiders had been attacking coastal villages. The traditional response would have been to send warriors to drive off the raiders and punish them for their aggression. Instead, the alliance chose a different approach. They sent a delegation that included not only warriors but also diplomats, traders, and craftsmen. Their mission was not primarily to fight, but to discover what drove these coastal people to raiding and whether their needs could be met through trade rather than theft. Marcus volunteered to lead this delegation, despite the obvious dangers involved. As he prepared for what might be his most challenging diplomatic mission yet, he found himself thinking once again about that long-ago night when he had shared his stew with a hungry stranger. He had learned that heroism rarely looked like the songs and stories suggested. True heroism was not about grand gestures or dramatic battles. It was about small acts of courage and compassion, repeated daily by ordinary people who chose to see the humanity in others rather than focusing on their differences. As he rode south toward the coast with his diverse team of negotiators, Marcus carried with him the same wooden bowl that Goran had used all those years ago. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose to share what they had rather than hoarding it for themselves. The Sea Raiders, as it turned out, were not motivated by simple greed or aggression. They were refugees from a series of devastating storms that had destroyed their island homes. Their raids on coastal villages were acts of desperation by people who saw no other way to survive. Once their true situation was understood, the solution became obvious. The Alliance had coastal communities with more farmland than they could use, and they had the resources to help the sea people rebuild their lives on dry land. What had seemed like a military problem was actually a humanitarian crisis that could be solved through cooperation rather than conflict. 6 months later, the former raiders had become some of the Alliance's most enthusiastic members. Their knowledge of sea travel and fishing opened up entirely new possibilities for trade and exploration. What might have become another cycle of violence and revenge instead became another example of how understanding and generosity could transform enemies into allies. Years continued to pass, and the alliance continued to grow. Communities joined not because they were conquered, but because they saw the benefits of cooperation and mutual support. The network eventually stretched from the frozen northern tundra to the warm southern seas, encompassing dozens of cultures and languages. But at the heart of it all remained the simple truth that Marcus had discovered that night in the forest, that sharing what we have with those in need is not just the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do as well. Every act of generosity created bonds that made everyone stronger and safer. Marcus lived to be an old man, honored throughout the Alliance as one of the founders of their peaceful confederation. But he never forgot that his own role in the Great Transformation had begun with something as simple as offering a bowl of stew to a hungry stranger. On his deathbed, surrounded by friends and family from many different communities, Marcus was asked what advice he would give to future generations. "Remember that we are all connected," he said softly. "The stranger who asks for help today might become the ally who saves your life tomorrow. Share what you have, trust in the goodness of others, and never forget that small acts of kindness can change the world." When news of Marcus's death reached all the communities of the Alliance, something unprecedented happened. Hundreds of warriors, traders, craftsmen, and farmers made pilgrimages to Peace Valley to honor his memory. They came from every corner of the vast confederation, speaking dozens of languages and following different customs. But despite their diversity, they all shared the same story. Each of them could trace their prosperity and security back to the night when a simple blacksmith had chosen to share his meal with a hungry giant. Each of them understood that their children's futures had been shaped by that single act of unexpected kindness. They built a monument in the center of Peace Valley, not a statue of Marcus himself, which you would have found embarrassing, but a simple stone table where travelers could always find food and water. Carved into the stone were words in all the languages of the Alliance, but they all said the same thing: share what you have, for in giving we receive the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that we are not alone in this world. And so the story of the ragged giant and the generous blacksmith became more than just a tale told around campfires. It became the foundation of a new way of living that spread far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he first stirred that pot of stew on a quiet evening in the forest. The alliance he had helped create continued to grow and prosper for generations, always guided by the simple principle that people of good can overcome any obstacle if they're willing to trust each other and work together for the common good. In the end, the greatest victory was not won on any battlefield, but around a campfire where a hungry man found kindness and a lonely traveler discovered that even the smallest acts of generosity can echo through the ages.